Son, and of the Holy Spirit. It is such a delight to be here, sitting in the parish hall that I've sat in so many times, but really not at all in the last 6 or 7 years, visiting with people who are newer to St. Stephen's, going back to Don and Carol Ann Brown, Steve and Kathy Wenfeld, and the things that many of us did together, connected to Cursillo and family camps, back in the days when Good Shepherd and St. Stephen's were woven together in so many ways. It's always a joy to be here and to see old friends. It's one of the greatest things about the church, isn't it? That our lives are woven together over decades, not just because we're Episcopalians, but in common ministry and social life. And so I'm very grateful to Kathleen for inviting me to come and share with you while she's on vacation. I'd like to begin by telling about Will Campbell, who was, his title was the Director of Religion at the University of Mississippi. I think that was their way of saying chaplain. During the 1950s, he was one of the truly significant people in the early civil rights movement in America. And he was, his activities on behalf of civil rights caused he and his family to live under significant threat. And at one time, some young men in their community actually took action to do harm to his family. One of them was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison. And on the night before he was due to report to begin his sentence, Will Campbell took his guitar and he went to the man's home, and he sat with the man and his wife and children on their big veranda. And they sang gospel songs together, and they prayed, and they talked all through the night, until finally, after the sun came up, it was time for the man's wife to drive him to begin his prison sentence. Does it seem strange to you that Will Campbell would go to the home of the person who tried to harm his family to spend that last night of that person's freedom singing and praying together? Could you imagine yourself doing something like that? You could. You could. Well, see? Well, I've thought a lot about Will Campbell's example, what that means to me. And I think it's appropriate this morning when we are praying in the gospel, praying in the collect, about God's abundant mercy, God bathing us with his mercy, that it is the mercy of God who brings about the fullness and abundance and guidance and direction in our life. Because I am pretty sure that Will Campbell understood that he was equally in need of the mercy of God with the person who had tried to harm his family. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me, given their culture in the Deep South, if somewhere along the way that night when they were praying their familiar gospel songs, they'd gotten around to singing, not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Will Campbell was not the good guy, and the guy on the porch was the bad guy. They were both guys in need of the mercy of God. No other standing for any of us than the mercy of God. And there together on the porch, they were sinners, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, praying and sharing their faith together. Did you happen to notice in the news last week that Monsignor in Philadelphia, who had failed to report child abuse, was sentenced 3 to 6 years in prison? It would have been a huge national story if it hadn't been for what happened in Aurora, Colorado, the terrible and senseless murder of all those people in the movie theater, and also the announcement of the NCAA sanctions against Penn State University, which were huge and caused tremendous comment. Taken together, those things, plus the normal run of toxic political discourse, makes it feel as if we are in the storm, like the one described in today's gospel. It felt to me all week long like, how can I be hit again? How many punches are there to take? If there was ever a time that we are in need of leadership which can provide hope and draw us together, it is now. In Colorado, one of the responses to the terrible tragedy was that the sale of guns just went like this. We felt better, evidently, in what happened at Penn State in characterizing Jerry Sandusky as a monster. It's a way to separate him out from the rest of us. There is a substantial difference between calling a person's actions monstrous and calling the person a monster. Jerry Sandusky, for all of the horrible things that he did, is no more in need of the mercy of God than I am or you are. Did you hear the church give witness to that truth even once in all of the fallout about Penn State or about the Monsignor in Pennsylvania? Did you hear the voice of the church offering a view of our common life that could be met better by actions drawing us together than by going out and buying more guns, have the effect of further separating and isolating us? The culture in which we live is desperately in need of the witness of the church. And the church has gone silent. There are a few extreme voices which get a disproportionate amount of attention in the press. The press is largely ignorant of the religious community and its life. And we have done nothing to change that. There are a few strident voices, but for the most part, the church that represents 90% of worshiping American Christians is silent in the face of forces in our culture that continue to drive us apart. And it's not just that we're silent in the culture, we're silent in our own pews. One of the iconic figures in the church that Rita and I attend confided in me a month ago. He said, I would never tell these people what I really believe. He means the other people in his own church. because he said they wouldn't like it. How true is that here at St. Stephen's? How many people in this congregation smile and work and come to communion and give generously and yet carry understandings of God and how God is acting in the world that they are reluctant to share because they might not be found acceptable? I'll bet you that if people would be honest and we ask that question, we could get an array of hands. Because even in the church, we are more concerned with asserting our particular view of reality and the gospel than we are in listening to what our neighbors have to share. And we would rather lead with what we believe is our strength rather than approach one another with humility, relying not on our wisdom, but only on the mercy of God. And yet we have no standing. No standing. Not the wisest among us has no standing except for the mercy of God through Jesus Christ. Not my sister, not my brother, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Until, as a community in our own congregations, we can live toward each other with the humility that brought Will Campbell to that veranda in Mississippi to be with the person who had tried to harm his own family. Till we can get to that point, we have nothing at all to say to the world. And the community in which we live, which is desperate to believe that there is a power strong enough to unify us in the face of everything that threatens to tear us apart. We're told in today's gospel that the disciples got into the boat. It doesn't say some of the disciples. It doesn't say all the male disciples, all the female disciples. It doesn't say the conservative disciples or the liberal disciples. It doesn't say the Catholic disciples or the Pentecostal disciples or the Episcopalian disciples. It says the disciples got into the boat. And they got out on the sea and the water got stormy. They were in the midst of a storm. And then Jesus appeared to them in their need. All of them about to be swamped. Not some of them. Not the ones who don't see things the way we see them. All of them were about to be washed away in the sea. And Jesus appeared to them. Scared them. Maybe they thought they would have to open up their hearts and embrace a larger truth than they knew. I just threw that in. They invited him into the boat. All of them equally in need, and it says that instantly they were on the shore and safe. Safety in Jesus Christ is not that every threat is vanquished. It is that we are gathered together in one family in the mercy of God. That's where safety is. We live in a culture where people feel increasingly unsafe. They feel increasingly divided from one another. They increasingly want to take into their own hands whatever they need for their survival and their perceived safety. And sitting in the midst of that culture is a community which exists only by the mercy and grace of God, and we seem to have nothing to offer to those who are so frightened, and yet at the very center of our life is their hope. Unless we are willing to build a community which relies only on the grace and love and mercy of God. Unless we are willing to be that community to each other, we have no valid witness to the world. And without the witness of the community of Christ to the larger community, we have no reason to believe that the sense of isolation, separation, fear, neighbor pitted against neighbor, that any of that